Brady Corbet spent 7 years trying to get The Brutalist made on a budget of $9.6 million, and along the way he lost 3 lead actors before a single frame of the film ran through the camera. Joel Edgerton, Marion Cotillard, and Mark Rylance were all attached at various points across the development. And all of them dropped off as the schedule kept moving and the financing kept rebuilding from scratch. By the time the production finally locked in early 2023, the cast on the call sheet was Adrien Brody, Felicity Jones, and Guy Pearce. The shoot ran 33 days in Budapest, which was doubled in for mid-century Pennsylvania, and Corbett shot the whole thing on VistaVision, a 1950s Paramount widescreen process that no American feature had used since Marlon Brando shot One-Eyed Jacks in 1961. When the finished film premiered in Venice in September 2024, A24 bought the US distribution rights about a week later, put their name on the poster, ran the awards campaign, and ended up taking home 3 Academy Awards. The film itself ends at the Venice Architecture Biennial. The reason that's worth pausing on is this. Every compromise Corbett had to absorb to get the film onto a screen turns out to be a compromise his protagonist absorbs to get a building onto a hilltop. Corbett was running the same calculation his architect was running, just at a different scale. The cleanest evidence of that pattern lives outside the film itself, in a controversial post-production decision Corbett made about 6 months before the theatrical release. The whole thesis of The Brutalist is provable from the production paperwork, and this is how. Lazlo Toth arrives in America in 1947 with almost nothing. He has a surname, a Bauhaus education, a talent so obvious that a man who has never seriously looked at a building can read it on contact. He has survived Buchenwald. He has come into a country that considers itself the philosophical opposite of the place he survived, and arrives through a side door, without ceremony, depending on the goodwill of a cousin he barely knows. The cousin is Attila. Attila has put together a small, functional American life. A furniture store in Pennsylvania, a Christian wife who has anglicized her name, a face of assimilation that leaves very little room for the Hungarian wife Lazlo left behind in Europe. That life is Erzsébet. She survived Dachau, along with her orphan niece Zofia, who has lost the ability to speak. Lazlo has no way to know how long he'll be in America without them. What he knows is that his hands still work, and that he is here. Brady Corbet arrives at the equivalent of his own side door in 2014, the year he turns 26. He has been a working actor since adolescence. Greg Araki cast him in Mysterious Skin at 15. Michael Haneke directed him in Funny Games at 18. Lars von Trier put him in Melancholia at 22. At 26, he steps away from the acting side of his career and starts directing his own features with his partner and co-writer Mona Fasvold. The Childhood of a Leader premieres at Venice in 2015 and wins the Best Director prize in the Horizons section, and it makes almost nothing at the box office. 3 years later, Vox Lux comes out with Natalie Portman in the lead. Serious critical attention again. Almost no commercial traction. By the time Corbett and Fasvold are writing The Brutalist in earnest, he has built a craft reputation and a script he believes in, and almost no leverage with anyone who is in a position to finance it. What Lazlo and Corbett share at this point is the same standing. Both of them can do the work, but neither of them has the money to do it on his own terms. Both of them are about to depend on a stranger who can recognize what they're capable of and decide to write a check. For Lazlo, the recognition arrives by accident. Attila takes a commission to renovate a library inside the Van Buren family estate, and when he realizes the job exceeds what he could personally execute, Lazlo handles the room. The patron who commissioned the renovation is Harrison Lee Van Buren, and the room Lazlo builds inside his house is more precise than the brief, more considered, the kind of room a man like Van Buren has paid for many times and never actually received. Harrison's response is appetite. He has located someone who can produce a thing his money has never quite been able to produce, and the gap between commissioning greatness and possessing it is a gap he's never had to look at directly. He starts closing it the same week he sees the library. The commission that follows is a community center on the Van Buren estate. Library, theater, gymnasium, and chapel. A monument to Harrison's late mother. It's a monument to Harrison's late mother. Designed to outlast the Van Buren family name, still bearing the Van Buren family name, but built according to Lazlo's architectural principles. For Corbett, the Van Buren equivalent arrives in stages. through producers and financiers who could see what his earlier films did and who want their names attached to the next one. The interest and the money are real, and every offer comes with terms. Both men accept the terms. The film begins its actual examination here. The commission opens in something that looks a lot like generosity. Harrison expedites the immigration paperwork that brings Erzsébet and Sophia to America. He provides housing on the estate. He folds Lazlo into his social world, and he funds the project. The warmth in the early phase is real because Harrison is paying for a thing he wants very much. And then the project overruns its budget. Harrison's contractors begin substituting cheaper materials and modifying Lazlo's specified designs without consulting him. When Lazlo objects, Harrison takes the contractor's side. The integrity of the building, the relationship between materials and ideas that Lazlo designed the whole structure around, gets folded into a balance sheet. Lazlo responds by agreeing to work the rest of the project unpaid in order to absorb the overrun. There's no big confrontation scene about this decision. He just runs the math on what the building needs in order to be completed correctly, identifies his own compensation as the one variable he can still control, and removes it. The institution accepts the new arrangement quietly. There's paperwork and a handshake, and the construction continues. Corbett, on the other side of the camera, is running the same calculation across his own production in real time. The original financing package collapses twice. The first cast falls off the project as the dates keep slipping. The shoot is supposed to happen in 2020, then 2021. Then the pandemic eats the schedule and disperses the producers. Each rebuild changes what the production can afford, and to keep the film alive, Corbett absorbs the cost in every place he can think of that isn't the conceptual architecture of the film. Hungary instead of Pennsylvania, 33 shooting days instead of a normal feature schedule, non-DGA crew, a compressed post-production. The film locks in early 2023 around Brody, Jones, and Pierce. The format and the cut stays, the running time and the script stays. He is making Lazlo's calculation. The architect runs his own compensation down to zero so the building can hold its shape. The director runs every available production variable into the ground so the film can hold its shape. The two men identify parts of the work that can absorb the loss without breaking the work itself, and they root the pressure into those points. Harrison eventually takes his own logic to its actual conclusion. The scene happens in the quarries in Tuscany, where Lazlo has traveled to oversee the marble that will line the chapel halls. Harrison follows him there. The two men are alone in an active marble mine, surrounded by the raw stone that is about to become the most contemplative interior space in the finished building. Harrison rapes Lazlo. He calls him a societal leech while standing inside the ongoing production of a monument that Lazlo is building with his own body and his own grief. The language stays the language of patronage, but this is an act of possession. Lazlo goes back to the project. The choice has nothing to do with forgiveness or recovery, though. The building is still standing there, incomplete. The concentration camp geometry Lazlo has been hiding inside the design is still unfinished, and walking off the site means the contractors finish the structure on their terms, with Harrison's name on the wall, and the encoded work in the bones of the building gets paved over. He goes back because it's the only way to protect what's there. Before we get there, the calculation Corbett is running right now has a structural parallel in a director working at the opposite end of the leverage spectrum, and the comparison opens up a lot. The Nolan essay is linked above. Corbett's equivalent of Carrara arrives later, in post-production, 6 months out from release, when his editor is staring at Hungarian dialogue that Brody and Jones cannot quite get right, and the institution offers him a tool. We will come back to that. Lazlo trained at the Bauhaus before the war. Bauhaus believed that form and function were inseparable, that the built environment shapes human consciousness, and that an architect's ethical obligation runs to that relationship before it runs to any other consideration. He learned this in Germany. He survived Buchenwald. Somewhere between the camp and an American furniture store in 1947, he developed a private conviction about what a building can carry, something no patron can commission and no patron can cancel out. The spatial geometry of the Van Buren Institute is derived from the architectural grammar of the camp Lazlo survived. The proportions of the chapel and the angles of the corridors, the width-to-height ratios of a space a visitor walks alone, each of these carries a reference to the architecture of industrialized destruction, and the references are built into the load-bearing structure of the room, rather than a place on top of it as ornamentation or quotation. Harrison commissioned a memorial to his mother, but Lazlo is building a memorial to Buchenwald inside the same walls. Harrison never knows. The contractors never know. The critical establishment that eventually reviews the finished building never knows. For the entire 7 years of construction, through the budget disputes and the material substitutions and Carrara, the actual content of the building stays invisible to the man whose name will appear on the walls when the doors open. The architect and the director are saying the same sentence for the past 7 years. The terms of the commission keep moving and the geometry holds. Patrons and artists have been working this arrangement for as long as patronage has existed. There are Renaissance Madonnas modeled on women the church never knew about. Requiems funded by men who didn't quite understand what the composer was actually mourning. Films financed with studio money that diagnose, in 2 hours of screen time, exactly what studio money does to a film. We're coming back to the last one in about a minute. If you find yourself drawn to films that take the architecture of storytelling seriously, subscribing helps. This channel exists exactly for that conversation. By the time the cameras finally roll in March 2023, the project has been rebuilt enough times that almost every variable has moved at least once. The cast is third generation, the location is wrong, the schedule is short, the crew is non-union, the financing is private equity. The director and his co-writer have given up most of what a writer-director normally tries to protect on a feature of this size. The one thing Corbett refuses to give up is VistaVision. VistaVision was a Paramount widescreen process developed in the 1950s for productions like White Christmas and Vertigo. It runs a 35mm negative through the camera horizontally, which doubles the frame area and produces a notably richer optical signature than standard 35mm. The format was essentially abandoned for feature production after Brando shot One-Eyed Jacks in 1961. Corbett wanted it because the film is set in mid-century America, and he wanted the optical fingerprint of mid-century American cinema baked into every single frame. The cost of maintaining a 1950s format inside a $96 million budget was significant. The cost of letting it go, though, for Corbett, was the film not being the film. VistaVision is his version of the line Lazlo won't cross. It's the chapel proportion, the encoded geometry that contractors cannot substitute out from under him. Every other variable absorbs the pressure, but the format held. The Brutalist was not commissioned by A24. It was financed privately and shot independently, and A24 acquired the US distribution rights at Venice in 2024, paying somewhere between $10 and $15 million for a finished film they had played no role in developing. Once they had the rights, the distribution machinery did what distribution machinery does. It was in Venice and Telluride in New York and London, the BAFTAs and the Golden Globes and the Oscars. Adrien Brody won Best Actor. Crawley won Best Cinematography. Daniel Bloomberg won Best Original Score. The Brutalist made $50.4 million worldwide against its $9.6 million budget. The film A24 was now associated with is a 3.5-hour examination of what institutional money does to the artist it funds. The film arrived as a finished object. The institution attached its name afterward, and then took home the awards, the box office, the prestige, and the strategic narrative about A24 as the home of difficult cinema in the prestige distribution era. Harrison Lee Van Buren cuts the ribbon on a building he did not design, and his name goes on the wall, but the structure still has the same shape. In post-production, Corbett's editor David Jancho used an AI tool from a Ukrainian company called Respeecher to refine the Hungarian language dialogue spoken by Adrien Brody and Felicity Jones. Neither actor is a native Hungarian speaker, and the dialect coaches and ADR could only carry the performances so far before specific vowel and consonant clusters started landing wrong for native ears. Respeecher closed the gap. Jancho, who is a native Hungarian speaker himself, fed his own voice into the tool to fine-tune particular phonetic moments. This was Corbett's Carrara. In the same way Lazlo had to walk into the heart of the stone to find the material for his chapel, Corbett had to reach into the heart of the machine to find the phonetic truth of his actors' voices. The compromise sat on the how rather than the what. A film diagnosing institutional compromise had quietly compromised. The reading that finds this scandalous needs The Brutalist to be a film about purity. It needs Corbett to have made the film from some protected creative space outside the mechanisms he's describing. where the pressure shaping Lazlo Toth somehow never applied to him. Neither Corbett, nor Lazlo, nor the film ever claims that space exists. What Lazlo actually does is work inside the Commission's constraints while protecting what the Commission was never designed to carry. He uses Harrison's land, money, and workers. Bauhaus methodology he was trained in before the war. He uses every resource the institution provides, and he places inside those resources a thing the institution could never have sanctioned on its own terms. Corbett used private equity money, a compressed Budapest schedule, a Ukrainian AI post-production tool, an A24 prestige distribution apparatus. He placed inside all those resources a 3.5-hour argument about precisely what all those things do to artists. The Respeecher Pass was a compromise on the how. The film's intellectual and emotional architecture went untouched. This is the same calculation Lazlo is making about his own compensation. The same calculation Corbett kept making about Hungary and the shooting schedule and the cast turnover. Identify the variable that can absorb the cost without breaking the work, spend that variable, and protect the work. The publicly documented Respeecher use is the cleanest proof the film offers. It's not the Venice Ending, not the Oscar campaign. It is the specific, dated, reportable production decision. The institution's tools were used in service of the artist's vision. The institution counts that as a successful outcome. It is. It is also the exact arrangement that the Brutalist spends 3.5 hours examining. The mechanism does not suspend itself because the artist happens to be making the film about the mechanism. This is not somehow poking a hole in Corbett's position. It proves it. We've documented this institutional logic playing out explicitly elsewhere, with a number attached to the decision. $25 million paid to make sure a film told the story the institution needed it to tell. Different tool, same calculation. That essay is linked above. The Brutalist ends in 1980 at the Venice Architecture Biennial. Lazlo is elderly and physically diminished. The Van Buren Institute has been standing for years. His work is finally catalogued, exhibited, and discussed by the same architectural establishment that took almost no serious interest in it while he was building it. Zofia delivers the address. The niece who lost her voice at Dachau, who spent the middle hour of the film unable to speak at all, is the one who tells the biennial audience what Lazlo encoded in the geometry. The biennial audience receives this revelation inside the most prestigious architectural forum on the planet. Lazlo is present in a wheelchair, past the point of speaking for himself. The work speaks through Zofia, through the institution, through the critical apparatus that has decided, 3 decades later, that this is a story worth telling. The ending is earned. The arc the film builds across 3.5 hours closes here. It is also, with precision, the ending the institution needs. Difficult art does not get crushed by the institutions that finance and distribute it. The institution is more sophisticated than that. Difficult art gets curated and preserved. It gets a Venice premiere and a biennial podium and an awards campaign, and a context inside which the institution can position itself as the apparatus that made the difficult thing visible. The biennial does not bury Lazlo's encoded trauma. It gives a stage and a podium and a catalog entry to it, and in framing it, the institution absorbs the difficult thing and ends up with credit for hosting it. This is what Harrison does the day the institute opens. He cuts the ribbon and hosts the gala. He has no need to prevent Lazlo's name from appearing in the program because the building bears the Van Buren name. Harrison has become the man who commissioned the masterpiece. The financial fights, the marble disputes, the Carrara quarries, the 7 years of construction, all of it gets converted, through the act of completion, into evidence of the patron's discernment. The biennial does the same thing for the Brutalist that Harrison did for the Van Buren Institute. It completes the circuit. Brady Corbet stood at Venice in 2024 receiving recognition for a film that diagnoses the exact mechanism that brought him to Venice. The institution is not embarrassed by this. None of this is cynicism. It's the arts economy, the institution, operating at full function. We've traced similar circuitry before. The work that encodes what the institution could never sanction, eventually framed by the same institution as proof of its own discernment. The Animal Farm essay follows the same logic from a different angle, and it's linked above. Most essays on the Brutalist land in the same place. Lazlo suffers. America disappoints. Harrison betrays, and the artist is consumed. The tragedy resolves cleanly. Read it that way, and the film disappears. A tragedy implies an alternative, that if Harrison had been a better man, if the financing had been more generous, if the era had been less brutal, Lazlo might have emerged whole. The film doesn't believe that. The pattern it describes has nothing to do with Harrison's specific failure. It's the structure of the whole thing itself. Resources flow toward vision because vision cannot fund itself. The patron requires the product because the patron cannot produce it. The dependency between the two is mutual and impersonal, and it produces a specific outcome with enough reliability that it should be treated as law. The artist who refuses the commission produces nothing the world can encounter. The artist who accepts the commission, they produce something the world can encounter, and that something always has the patron's name on the wall next to the artist's. The artist's real work, the thing the commission was never designed to fund, survives anyway. Lazlo's encoded geometry is still in the chapel walls. Corbet's diagnostic is still in the film. The institution's money built the container, and the artist placed something else inside it. The institution, when it eventually figures out what the container holds, does not suppress it. The art that exposes the mechanism is still art. The institution that hosts the art still gets the apparatus that made it visible. You're inside the mechanism right now. This essay lives on a platform that converts your attention into data. This channel runs inside a recommendation system that rewards specific durations, thumbnails, and search terms. The work in front of you was made possible by an infrastructure that is processing every second you spend watching it. None of that disqualifies the work, but none of that is the same thing as the work. Lazlo knew, and he built accordingly. Brady Corbet knew, and he shot accordingly. Harrison Lee Van Buren cut the ribbon. His name is on the wall. A24 bought the film. Their name is on the poster. The work is still in the building, and the work is still in the film. Thanks for watching, and stay copacetic.